everyone, welcome back. Let's continue our journey through the music of our tonelico. We're still on our first game, Melody of Alemia. There, I'll adjust my camera. Melody of Alemia. We're still working our way through Concert Side Blue. Our next song, our third song that we're going to talk about today is York of Love. So if I pull out my lyrics booklet here, gotta be careful. I have, even since the last video, damaged this a little bit more by opening it. I think one of the cats also knocked it over, unfortunately. This is a very cat-climby area. We have a window right above, like a privacy window right above this. Beautiful, and the cats love to lay in it, but doesn't bode well for decorations. So if we look at the songs that we've analyzed so far. So for example, last week we looked at Chronicle Key. You see the lyrics here are a mixture, actually for Chronicle Key, the lyrics are entirely in hymnos. Whereas in Singing Hill Harmonics Aeolia, we have a mixture of Japanese and hymnos. So already we've had two types of songs, one that had lyrics in just the conlang, and one that had lyrics in both Japanese and the conlang. York of Love is another unique case that has lyrics only in one of the languages, but this time the lyrics are only in Japanese. And we notice when we look at the title here, York of Love is considered the canonical title in English, right? This book is not, this came out for the Kurt Himnith box set, which was never natively sold in English. It was only sold in Japanese stores. I had to order it, I think, off of Yes Asia. I actually have my receipt inside the box because I don't get rid of anything. But even though the title of this song is canonically in English, there is a Japanese version of this title, which is Ai no Kizuna, which is literally translated to bonds of love. So York is, the usage of the word York is meant to be more of a, like, this is kind of like the vibe. We're going for that like medieval, like Renaissance-y vibe. Literally the common word that you would use is bond. So the title translates to bonds of love, which makes a lot of sense in terms of what the song means and when the song is played in game. So before we get to that, let's talk about how this is our first song from a new singer. And then we'll use that to segue to who the character is, because each singer in the Artonelico songs, in the Artonelico universe, corresponds to a different character. Now, Singing Hill Harmonics Aeolia was just meant to be an intro song. It wasn't necessarily Misha singing it, even though it was Misha's singer singing it. But Shikata Akiko sings as Misha in the hymnos parts of the game. Like Shimutsuki Haruka sings as Orika in her songs that we'll get to on Concert Side Red. The singer for York of Love is Ishibashi Yuko, and she is a Revitel, but not a Revitel that is in the party. So she is the only non-party Revitel that we really encounter in the game-ish. And we encounter like other like she's the only one that has songs, is what I should be saying. And she is the only other character, period, who has songs in the game. So not only is she the only non-party Revitel with songs, she's the only other character with songs. So that's a really interesting and unique perspective on her. But what's interesting, and I learned this as I was doing some research for this video, if you parse through the data files and do some data mining in Melody of Alemia, you actually find that there are unused assets that suggest Claire could have been playable at some part of the game. Now, we do get some awesome Claire stuff later on in terms of the Hymnos musical. We also get stuff about Spica. It's the Claire and Spica Hymnos musical. There's also songs from Shimutsuki Haruka and a male vocalist, Donna. So we'll talk about all those. We'll do the game songs, the OVA songs. There's only 3 of them. It's a nice segue into the Hymnos musical. But we'll hear more from Ishibashi Yuko then. She only has 2 songs on the Blue Side album. The albums are split by singers. So we have the 2 singers, Shikata Akiko and Ishibashi Yuko, on Concert Side Blue, and they happen to correspond to Misha and Claire. So those are the 2 singers that characters and singers will be bouncing back and forth between. As the games progress and more vocalists get added, it's not simply a case of here's 2 vocalists and 2 vocalists and we're equally split. And certainly Shikata Akuko sings on Exec Phantasmagoria, which is on concert side rad. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but it is one that they tried to abide by. Certainly for organizational purposes, for the case of designing good art for the cover, there could have been licensing issues because every singer is potentially backed by a different contract, different record label, etc. There's a multitude of reasons, but all the discs are published under the same label. So I have a inkling that contract disputes and record label disputes aren't a part of it, and it was more just an organizational issue. Now, let's talk about when this song was played. So Claire is not a party member. She is an NPC that you run into pretty early on in the game. So in the beginning of the game, Liner gets sent on a quest like every major RPG hero. He certainly follows in the footsteps of many greats, certainly does not deviate from that formula in terms of actual story progression. The tonelico games really deviate from that formula in terms of character development, in terms of the conversation system and the diving system, and certainly the music. So tonelico definitely sets itself apart in a lot of ways. The main plot and story beats are pretty straightforward, which probably makes this a less, even though it's a niche title, more accessible. If literally everything were off the wall or going against the norm, certainly it would be a lot harder to get into these games. So thankfully, we have a story that complements in its straightforwardness the complexities of other parts of the game. So Liner gets sent on a mission, he gets put on an airship, and his airship crashes. And, because he starts in a high-level area with powerful people, but of course our main character has to go on a hero's journey and grow stronger and stronger, so he goes to a low-level area, a standard RPG fare. When he crashes his airship, he runs into Orica, which is how we meet our first heroine, and then he meets Misha eventually, but Orica heals him, and she's a little, she doesn't know him, so she's a little wary. And so as the game goes on, they go into town, and, plot points happen in the game, but at some point, Liner and Orca go into a bar, and Liner is a bit focused on his mission and doesn't really, he's dense. I've talked about this before. Anybody who plays tonelico knows Liner has a reputation for being dense, so much so that it is actually played for laughs in our No Surge. Liner is not, obviously Liner doesn't exist yet, he's not born yet, but Casti and Delta tease another character about, and I don't want to give spoilers if you haven't played No Surge because it does come later and it is meant to be like a Easter egg for the tonelico fans. And basically they tease another character saying, don't let yourself fall for a guy that is dense and that doesn't see things, doesn't pay attention to things, doesn't notice things. And basically they're making fun of Liner because that character will eventually run into Liner and is, potentially, yeah. I don't want to get too much into that. So we all know that. We all love that. But in this case, he gets into a fight with this character, this guy that's in this bar, right? And so he's so focused on everything that he doesn't realize that this scares Orica and she runs away. And Claire's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, there are people around here who care for you and you're literally like pushing them away and ignoring them because you have this mission you need to complete. Like, these people will help you complete your mission. And honestly, what happens if you fail your mission? Don't you still want these people around to comfort you? Like, slow your roll, dude. Just chill. Here's a song I wrote to tell you that the bonds of love are sometimes more important than the immediate objectives you have to complete. Again, bonds of love being the song title. I know Kizuna. Again, translates to Yoko Love, whatever. So it's very funny, but it is actually something that a message that I really believe holds up well. I think this is something that a lot of us lose sight of, that we, some of us, especially some of us who are more neurodivergent, we get really focused on things and we just kind of let everything else fade into the background. Until a couple weeks ago, worked a second job and I was working, 14, 16-hour days, 7 days a week. And it was by choice. Certainly I wanted to do this, but I kind of, I was sat down by my spouse and I pretty much said, you're going to have to wait for me, which is not something you want to say to someone you're married to, until I finish work in a couple years because, this is life. Not the right thing to say. My spouse did thankfully wait for me and I'm not working at that job anymore. And I met a fantastic and unrealistic financial goal. So we're certainly better off, but I could have used the message of this song to be like, no, Callie, step back. You have to pay attention to the people around you who love you, because you're the people that are going to help you shoulder your burdens, help you de-stress, help you walk the paths of life. And certainly I missed some years of my child growing up because I worked so much. So definitely I should have taken this message to heart. And I hope through this analysis now you come to appreciate the song better and take the message to heart in my absence, since I was not able to. Okay, so as we're going to hear in this song, the song is quite simple. Because this wasn't a hymn in the traditional sense, in that it was meant to be sung like throughout the course of the game to serve a large purpose, like Chronicle Key was. It didn't have a lot of parts of harmony. It didn't have, layered vocals. I didn't do any arranges on this. And both of Ishibaki Yuko's songs are like this. So we don't have any sheet music to go along with this, but I did just figure out the chord progression here before the video. The song is incredibly straightforward. There's a lot of repetition in the parts. So it will be a pretty straightforward analysis, which is kind of nice to be sandwiched in between some songs that are quite a bit more complicated. What's really interesting is, this Our tonelico is a series that's known for its intricate vocal harmonies. And so we're going to find is, for the most part, we just have a single line of melody, sometimes another line of harmony, sometimes an ooh kind of going up and down in the background, but really meant for atmosphere rather than harmony. So why the difference? In a blog post, I've referenced to Chiakira's blog post before. In these blog posts, he talked about how he got to recruit his singers for his project, specifically for Our tonelico 1. Those are the blog posts I have translated right now to refer to. And he talked about how he knew Shimotsuki Haruka, Shikata Akiko, and Mitose Noriko from their work in other projects. Shimotsuki and Shikata were known in the doujin scene. Mitose Noriko had done the ending theme for Chrono Cross. So they had already they were starting to establish themselves and stood out in their circles. Ishibaki Yuko hadn't done that much. And instead of seeking her out, one of his colleagues came and said, "Hey, I heard you're working on this awesome project relating a lot to music. I have a singer for you." And he heard her sing and was like, "Yeah, let's do this." So there's a bit of a difference here in how he recruited her for the project. And that could influence how he decided to use her, because he talked about her voice differently than he talked about the other three's voice. And certainly it sounded like, based on the songs he wrote for her in this game, he wanted to emphasize her vocal tone and vocal quality rather than try to layer the vocals up to create this grand song that may have hidden some of the intricacies of the talent that she had. Specifically, he thought her voice the translation said, need embellishment. Not saying he thought less of the other singers, but as a vocalist, when I listen to Ishibashi Yuko's voice, I definitely hear a depth of talent. And not that the others aren't talented, but I hear a depth in her voice that I don't necessarily hear in the others. Her voice is not a very typical Japanese singer voice. And now I say this, the word typical is a very strange word, like everybody is supposed to be average. But Japanese singing, especially in pop singing, is characterized a lot by a nasal quality and very little vibrato. And certainly Shimotsuki Haruka and Shikata Akiko have this nasal-like quality with very little vibrato. Shimotsuki Haruka has no vibrato at all. Now, Mitose Noriko is a different case. Her voice does have a slight nasal quality, not as severe, but she has a lot of vibrato. Actually, she has kind of an uncontrollable vibrato. She reminds me of a more traditional, enka-like singer, in that she has just a vibrato that just kind of goes, goes everywhere. It's a very fast, very tinny vibrato, but it goes and it goes. And that can backfire on her sometimes. We're going to analyze some songs where that works beautifully and gives a beautiful tone and a beautiful layer and depth. And then there are some songs where that vibrato sounds almost unstable, and it's being used almost as a chaotic element in the songs. Whereas Ishibashi Yuko sounds almost like she's been heavily, heavily trained and refined, and her voice sounds to me like a reed instrument, like something very, very, you think very clearly and you push the sound through in a very purposeful way. Her vibrato seems incredibly controlled. Everything about her voice just seems very technical and precise. Whereas the others maybe have a little bit more fluidity and freedom more runs, more slides, more changes in tone. Not that Ishibashi Yuko can't do that, but her voice definitely has a different color. And so her voice being used differently makes a lot of sense. So there's very little going on. There is the lute that plays the main background. There's a very little percussion. There's a violin that comes in at one point, and then there's some choir ooze in the background. And that's really it for this song. So let's get into, again, I don't know sheet music, so we're just going to be talking about the song and going back and forth between the song and the analysis. Actually, because I don't have sheet music, I do have the chord progressions. Rather than talking about verses and choruses, this song is laid out quite oddly. I'll be talking about an A part, a variation on an A part, and a B part. You could think of the two A parts as two different types of verses and the B part as a chorus. My initial first draft of my analysis had that language, but I think it makes more sense to talk about it as A part, B part, and A part variant, simply because the structure of the song, the verses aren't usually placed in this way. It'll make more sense when we go into it. In general, the key is F minor throughout the whole piece, and the song is in 6/8 time, so it's going to have that 1 2 3 4 5 6. So a swaying feeling. This is very commonly, used in lullabies, used in like old music when you want to dance a little bit. Very much makes sense for a calming song that you would hear in a tavern where you would sway with your mead. Very, very standard. All right, so we're going to start at the very beginning here, as per usual. We're going to go through, and the song is quite long for being what it is. It's 5 minutes and 20 seconds, but because we don't have the sheet music to go with it, the analysis will not be as long as some of the other ones. So let's begin. Pause right there. So we just did part A, which was the first 2 lines, and then we had 2 lines for part B, and then we went back into part A with we're getting to a variation. There's a part A that leads into part B and the part A that does not lead into part B, which is why I call them the variation, not variation. So the part that starts with that part is what I'm calling the part A and the variation of part A, because they both start the same. And then the part that starts a bit higher, the that part's the part B. It has a very different melody. So that's how I'm differentiating the parts. And so we had the intro, the very, very simple, very short intro, right? There wasn't, vocals came in right after that. What was that? Two measures or so. 1 2 3 4 5 6. 1 2 3 4 5 and 6. Yeah, 2 measures, and then the vocals come right in. And for the most part, everything is very standard in the key of F minor. So we have, what do we have? F minor, B minor, D flat, E flat, F minor, F minor, B flat minor, D flat, E flat, and then things change a little. We go into A flat to end, so rather than going back to the tonic, and this is because we're transitioning from one part to the next. So the first line of the A part started and ended on the same chord, the tonic chord of F minor. But since we're transitioning away into a different part, we ended the second line which is the last line of the A part. I'm dog sitting. I apologize if you hear him whining. He hasn't been adjusting well. So we ended the A part on an A flat chord, which is a major chord in the key of F minor. So that gives a very different sound. And A flat, actually, as a note, is the minor third in the F minor chord. So we're still staying in the F minor system, but we're bringing in a minor chord to do a transition. The chorus doesn't start on our tonic; it starts on the B flat. So. B flat, F minor, B flat minor again, F minor again. So the first two chords of the B part repeat. And then we get to a slightly different pattern, which ends in a very interesting way again. It doesn't end on the tonic or the chord we start with, when we get there, because we're again transitioning back to the A part, this time A variation. So the second line of the chorus starts on D flat, E flat, C minor, F minor, B flat, and this is actually B flat major, and then D flat, and then C major. And notice that serves as a really good transition point, having that C major chord. I'm bringing in an accidental here. I brought in a couple accidentals throughout that whole last line. The key of B flat, the B flat chord itself, isn't in F minor. B flat minor is, and we've heard that before in the verse and the chord, and not the verse, the A part and the B part. But so we're bringing in the D natural, and then we're going into the D flat. So we're flatting again to get a D flat chord. And then we're going to C major chord. And this is a very common way to transition to another part of the song or to a different key entirely. We're staying in the key, we're just transitioning to a different part of the song. So the actual, every key has a scale. In the F minor scale, D, so we have the flats are, we have 4 of them. We have, in the order they would appear on the clef, if you actually wrote the key signature out, you would have B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat. The upper 2 flats, which are the second and fourth flats you would add to make the key, are D flat and E flat. These are the 2 that were naturaling and unnaturaling in these last couple measures. And specifically, they're what start off the C, D, E is what starts off a C major scale. So a really interesting way to do a chord. So usually a chord is the 1, 3, 5, but sometimes we bring that 9. So we finish the chord, we go to the next note, which is the 9, and we pull it in. We make kind of it sounds almost like a rainbow to me. But that's what's happening here. We're bringing that 9 back down. So, and then we're bringing the major third in. And so that allows us to then transition back into a different part of the song. It kind of lets us know that, hey, we're moving to something else. I'm getting your attention and we're moving back to part A. And part A, we're going to do a variation and it's going to repeat. And so the variation, the reason why I'm calling this a variation is because it doesn't end on that A flat chord. That's going to transition us back to B part, because we're not transitioning to anything. We're ending with the variation on A, and then we're going to go into a little short break. So that is the structure, and that's actually the main structure of the entire part of the song. There's one little bit more of a variation that we're going to do, and then everything vocal-wise is going to repeat a few times, and then the song's going to be done. There's going to be little instrumental breaks that bring in different side things. We're going to add some harmonies here, but the main bulk of the song actually is set at this point. The chord progression is going to remain mostly the same. The melody is going to remain mostly the same, barring the fact that we have another, 2 lines or so of the A variation. And then it's just mixing and matching things together. And that's why I said this analysis is actually going to be quite short, because there's really not much else to talk about. So from here on out, it's just going to be talking about like what's going to be added to the formula here and what that addition brings in. Because we've talked about the notes now. We've talked about the chords now. We've talked about the accidentals and what purpose they have. We've talked about the transitions. And that's the meat of the song that's going to be brought around. Okay, so let's continue. So we're going to finish up a variation, and then we're going to have a little bit of a break. And then we're going to stop and talk about the purpose of that break. And that was the rest of the A variation and the short break we had. So the rest of the A variation, so I purposely stopped before that part of the A variation because we brought in harmony for the first time. The choir bits at the top, the and those had been going on since the B part, but we actually brought in another line to complement and go along with the main melody. And it was mostly doing thirds, a very standard and pleasant harmony to supplement Ishibashi Yuko's very pleasant and clear tone. One thing I didn't mention before that I can mention now is her use of something called dynamics. So for many of the other singers in the tonelico series, when they want to change kind of how their voice is coming off, they actually change the tone. We hear this the most with Shikata Akiko. She has her very full, deep tone, and she has her pleasing, quiet, childlike tone. Contrast the 2 parts of Chronicle Key that we talked about last week. The verse part was very bright and airy, where the chorus part was very deep and full. Ishibashi Yuko doesn't do that. She keeps the same tone, but she uses different dynamics. So she will when she wants things to be fuller, she pulls it more to the front of her mouth for a louder sound, where she pushes the sound out more. And then when she wants to go softer, she pulls it back and adds a little bit of a breath. So the best way I can describe it is she starts off the line, she eases into it, and then she backs off. Unless she's going for a transition in which from one part to another, in which she stays at that full bit. So that taking that very first line of the song, she would stay very full, and then she'd back off and have a softer, breathier tone. So she's not actually changing how her voice really sounds. She's using volume and breathiness. Breathiness, I guess, is kind of akin to tone, but I'm contrasting it with the way the other singers change their tone a lot more drastically than just adding breathiness. And so she uses that volume. The volume is called dynamics in music, and breathiness to have some of that contrast, even within the same line of the same song. And it provides depth. So, we're going to have some of the same melodies over and over and over in the song. Like I said, we're a third through this song. And like I said, there's going to be no really new elements. We're just going to start supplementing some of these elements together, but mostly just repeating a lot of these pieces. But by using these volume dynamics and breathiness, she's going to make it sound not as boring, potentially, as a very repetitive song could be. She's going to make it still sound fresh to our ears, and certainly her voice is beautiful enough that I'd put up with. I mean, we have exec hibernation on tonelico too. What is that, 14 minutes of her singing, and I don't get bored during that. Certainly she pulls a lot more of a tonal change that we'll talk about. That's the first time she really does that. She does it very well, but I quite like this approach as well. I think this approach works really well, especially for a character like Claire, who is a performer, who is performing as herself and, singing, her songs on her lute in the bar and the tavern. She doesn't really need to do as much of a tonal change. She's got her customers who like her for who she is, and that's what she needs to provide. So that is what happens. And that's the way that she differentiates the parts of this song. Anyway, then we had a little bit of a short break, very short break, where we brought in the intro again. We added some very like subtle cymbal crashes. They didn't really sound like full cymbal crashes. They sounded more like samples of cymbal crashes. A full cymbal crash we heard in Chronicle Key, they were big and bombastic. This was a lot more subtle for a cymbal crash, but we brought back that original loop melody, and then we're going to go right back into part A. So like I said, we're going to rinse and repeat a bit, keeping some more of the harmony coming back in, upping a little bit of the percussion, but the percussion here is not really used to keep rhythm. It's more used to supplement and complement the existing rhythm of the lute. And then, of course, I didn't mention there is a bass line that comes in, just like a standard electric bass. Very simple. Mostly just plays the bass line and walks along a little bit. So when I say a bass line walks along, so the beginning, if I were just to play the bass notes, F, B flat, D flat, E flat, F at the beginning, right? So maybe instead of just going from F to B flat, I go, right? I just kind of get there. I take a couple notes, and then instead of going straight from, B flat to D flat, I'd walk up the scale, right? So that it didn't sound like I was jumping around. That's what I mean when I say I'm walking across the bass line. It means I'm not jumping from note to note, just going straight on the quarter note beats. Or in this case, it'd be dotted quarter note beats because we're in 6/8. But either way, I'm taking that extra 8th note or 16th note at the very end of the bar before, to slowly and more smoothly transition to the next measure and the next chord. So there is a little bit of that walking the beat. That also contributes to the smoothness of the song, right? The song is very flowy and subtle. Yuko Ishibashi's voice is very flowy. She's able to do things with her dynamic range so that she can keep things flowing and smooth and yet still provide a contrast. But that bass line also contributes to that. The fact that there's not a lot of percussion. Some of the percussion is literally an egg shaker, like very, very subtle to keep that warm and inviting tavern-like feel. So we're going to do the second chunk, which is again an A, a B, and an A variant before another break. So exact same structure, right? We had A, B, and then a double A variation, which I forgot that A variation was doubled and I accidentally paused too early. I must have been misremembering, must have been the egg shaker in a different song. Instead, I heard a very, very slight, like just like a single snare hit every once in a while that I must have misheard. I heard a few small cymbal hits, a few kicks. The percussion did certainly up. There was a bit more of it here, but it certainly still wasn't something driving the rhythm. You're not doing, boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom. We're very, very still driving the song with the vocals. The harmony came in like I said, it upped a little bit, but we're still only doing one line of harmony. And then that chorus harmony, I say chorus, but I mean more like the choir harmony in the back, which is a line or two of ahs, nothing too crazy. And really those ahs are blending into the background. Like you can hear them, but you can barely pick out, like I can pick out the notes of the main line, but I can't quite pick out what the harmony is. I'm certain there's 2 lines there. Can't quite hear. Because it's not meant to be a focus, it's really meant to be kind of in the back. So this is also a very different way to approach a song than what, say, Chronicle Key did. In Chronicle Key, I talked about voices as instruments at times, which is certainly happening here with the ahs in the background. But even in a song like Chronicle Key or Singing Philharmonic's Aeolia, the different vocal lines, the counter melodies, they were using the voices as ways to create rhythm, as ways to drive the song forward, with a different type of melody, using different layers of harmonies to really push, the block chords of the chorus of Chronicle Key, for example, to push things forward. Whereas here, the voice is used more as a focus, as like, hey, we're giving you a melody with some lyrics. Like, you could go sing this at karaoke. Like, I'm not saying this is a pop song, but it certainly has that more traditional, like, I very much care about the vocals, period, but I'm not caring about the vocals as a chunk. I'm looking specifically at the melody and the melody line. I don't know if I'm quite articulating what I mean, but it's very different the way the song wants to emphasize the vocals. So we're going to get into the last instrumental break and then transition throughout the end of the song. We're going to have a lot more of the same structure coming up, the same melody and chord progression as we've had before with some A parts. And then we're going to get to the end of the song. So we're almost done. And so I do want to mention before we get to the A part again. So we had an instrumental break there that had I think it was like a clarinet or an oboe, and then we had a violin. So we had a reed instrument solo, and then we had a violin solo. It could be violin, could be viola. Violin is much more common. But the first solo played over like the A part structure, and this, which wasn't necessarily as obvious because it had a different melody, but it was very obvious when the violin came in, it played over the B part structure because it actually brought in some of those melodies from the B part. And then if you listen, we have an extra measure here with that little ting. Songs tend to, like to switch things up when things are played multiple times, just for freshness and variety. We've already noticed that with the addition of percussion, with the addition of harmonies. It's just doing that again. We're going to transition back to the A part. We're doing something a little different during that transition so that it seems a bit more fresh and a little bit more unexpected, so that we don't get fatigued from hearing the same thing over and over and over. That's really the purpose of it. There's nothing special. It's not meant to trick us. I mean, it's kind of meant to trick us so that we don't get bored, but, it's not so out there that we think it's odd. Certainly there are things like if I start adding, random beats in certain measures, it will start to feel strange. Adding an extra measure at the end of a section, it's fine. If we're in the middle of a section, we'd feel it and we'd hear it. But at the end of a section, it's part of a transition. Nothing going on there. There's a little bit of a background, like synth orchestra or synth choir that's like changing in volume a little bit. You can barely hear it, but it's kind of leading into it too. It's kind of going kind of like almost. It's kind of hard to hear, along with that ting to kind of bring us back in, because we've gone from what's only instrumentation to now we're going back to a part that's focusing on the vocals again. So we're bringing us back into that vocal part, and so that change in dynamics that we're going and we're bringing in a sound is part of that transition to bring us in. But we're going to go to the A part, And then we're going to transition through the end of the song. So it did the A variation twice, and at the end of the second one, Sobani itani, it slowed down a bit, and she almost kind of whispered the last couple lines, just to kind of slow down and show like, hey, things are coming to a close. And then the overall, we repeated that. The dog we're sitting just chased one of our cats. It repeated that intro a few times. Percy! But it slowed. Sit. But it slowed down at the end. Yes, I know, you're a big needy COVID dog. And then at the end, it did what we called a ritardando. Now, a ritardando is a musical term that just basically means to slow down. And usually it's abbreviated RIT. And it comes from the Italian word that means to slow down. And so that's what it's doing at the end there. It is slowing down. It is lengthening the notes. Each beat is longer than the beat before it. So the tempo is how many beats per minute a song has. So songs generally have, anywhere from 60 to, 180 beats per minute is pretty normal. A faster song is we would generally think is more danceable than a slower song, but a slower song certainly can be like more of like a waltz or a slow dance, right? But as we do a ritardando, we decrease the beats per minute. It's kind of like if we were just turning a wheel and sliding that wheel down, like just slowly sliding that wheel down. So we're not like flipping a switch and instantly doing a tempo change. We are slowly turning the wheel down until the song ends, and then the beats per minute don't matter anymore because there's no more beats that are going to be emphasized in the song. And so that's what's happening at the end of this song. It's a very common way to end songs, is to do, if you don't just want to just end it and be done, you do a ritardando or you can do a fade out as well. I'm not a big fan of a fade out, and the ritardando it's good to end a song, but if you end every song with it, it starts to sound a bit heavy-handed, like, oh, that's the only way you know how to end a song. But if you want to just, like in this case, what happened was that same intro motif, the repeated like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And so by slowing down that last one, it was able to emphasize that, yeah, this is the melody we want to do, but look, this time we're done, right? And so it was able to take that same melody and use that same melody transition to the end of the song without having to actually add or change what it was doing to do like a different chord. And the reason why that worked really well or was necessary, and we couldn't just end the song. I mean, we could have just ended the song. It would have felt abrupt. The chord pattern was F minor, E flat, F minor. So we were already mostly in one chord the entire time during that progression, and it was the tonic chord. And normally we want to end on the tonic. So if we're already there, when do we end it if we're already there when we start it, right? and I don't want to transition away from it. So that's why adding the ritardando here made a lot of sense, because it signaled, hey, yeah, we repeated this a lot. You're probably maybe starting to get sick of this, especially if you're listening to the song and repeat so that you're ready to analyze it. But here we're really done this time, I promise. So that was the purpose of the ritardando, and why this song really did need something like that ritardando to end it. Otherwise, it would have felt very, very abrupt to finish the song. All right, sorry for the interruptions at the end. That was our analysis of Ishibashi Yuko's York of Love. Much more simple song, but there was still quite a bit to talk about, especially concerning her addition to the musical cast and what Tsuchiya Akira thought of her and her vocals and what her style brought to the games. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment below if you want to talk more, ask questions about this song or any of the other songs. Share a story about when you first met Claire and what you thought of Liner resorting to violence in her tavern. And maybe, I shared kind of what the message of this song said to me and how that related to my life. Maybe share a story about yours and how, now that you know the meaning of the song, how it relates to you and how it resonates with you. As always, I will be back with my next analysis. I'm thinking of doing a Monday release schedule simply because it works really well. I can take advantage of university internet to upload it at work on Mondays. And then if something were to happen, I have the rest of the week to do a later upload at work as well. So we'll get this uploaded and then we'll see you the next Monday. I believe the next song is Misha's Perjure. So that'll be a really fun one to analyze. There's a lot going on in that song. I really like it. So I'm trying not to let whether or not I like a song influence my analysis. So forget I said I really liked it. I really like all these songs. How about we do that? All right, see you next time.